teachers. However, we can't really make an overall assessment of the social responsibility yet. We can say that the general dynamic is positive and that the situation is not cast in stone, because jurisprudence has changed. When Article 60 was adopted, there was virtually nothing had been done with respect to requalification, but jurisprudence has helped to deal with that problem. But there's a new step when it comes to social responsibility for the last year, what with the proposal to install charters that would help the platforms provide further guarantees to their workers. And as a counterpart, the companies would be protected from the risk of having the activities requalified. Those charters were integrated into a law adopted last summer, the law on vocational training. But that article was rejected by the Conseil Constitutionnel, the sort of Supreme Court, in September, and it came back in the framework of a new law which is being discussed by a commission in Parliament and will probably be voted before summer. So we're really in the midst of a legislative process on this initiative. Those charters are unilateral. That is to say, it's the platform that decides to enforce social responsibility or not, and that with the agreement or the examination by the administrative authorities that have to judge on the compliance, it would protect them from the risk of being requalified if they implement a certain number of measures for their workers.
Elles ont trait, et ça c'est quand même un point important dans le contexte qui nous amène à discuter ici, elles prévoient que la plateforme puisse mettre en place des modes.
One point that's important, and that is that it will allow sharing of information and sharing of know-how. And also there are different clauses concerning the way in which the professional activity is going to be carried out. And it's also impossible to discuss rates. In France, anyway, in the French law, the question of the minimum rate, decent rate, is a legal concept. And this is something which, for the past 3 years, has been constantly been discussed by different people. It really is a subject which is on the agenda, and there are other aspects that have been introduced concerning additional guarantees, for example, concerning pension rights and other rights. So it's rather difficult to be able to foresee what's going to happen with the charters, but I'd just like to say that the discussions that are underway right now around this project are very interesting, but also we realize that the sort of discussions leading to this bill being prepared means that sometimes there are unilateral actions being taken place with very little obligation to have negotiations from the other side. So in fact, because it is a charter, so in fact we are dealing with an initiative which is actually got an unilateral approach compared to what I said earlier on in the first session. Anyway, that's all I wanted to say about France. Let me give the floor to Dominique now, who is going to be talking to us about Poland.
Hello, everybody. Dominique Owczarek, and I represent Poland Institute of Public Affairs. And I'm going to to introduce a presentation prepared by Małgorzata, actually, but let me say a few words in order to acquaint you in a better way with the Polish context. Well, in general, business model of platforms, which is a new one, and we've discussed it today and during the last meeting in Warsaw, encounters national contexts, and it's a general rule and it is obvious, but it's very important to understand what is the Polish context in order to understand what is the situation on the ground. This is also an answer to the question why there was no presentation from Poland in the previous two sessions. That means the session on workers' initiatives and collective bargaining. But let's make the story short. Polish industrial relations system is quite weak, undeveloped. That means that the collective agreements cover only small portion of the labor market, and they operate mostly in the public sector, both in public institutions and state-owned companies. That means that the private sector is an empty case. Right. So, incidents of collective bargaining or collective agreements in private sector barely occur, which is a Polish specificity, and to some extent it is similar to the UK's context. And Poland and the UK very often in theoretical classifications are in the same group of countries of industrial relations. Another thing that social partners are relatively weak in terms of resources that they have, and also the impact on legislation and at the company level. The impact on working conditions is relatively weak, especially, and that regards especially to the private sector, and of course platforms are the private sector. This is the part of the labor market that we are discussing today. On the top of that, according to the Polish law, self-employed and those who are employed under civil law contracts were not allowed, they were not entitled to become a member of trade union. That has changed recently in January 2019, so it's been already like 5 months when the law has been amended, and this social right, this worker right, has been extended to all workers, regardless the form of employment. And that is the reason why social partners, trade unions, did not take an initiative, because they did not have any members in the sector. Right, so this is the justification of lack of actions in these terms. And all of this shifts the discussion on platform work from industrial relations system and collective bargaining towards the legal regulations, because this is the level where at least some initiatives, some actions could be undertaken. And in the Polish context, we do have, of course, employees that are covered by the labor code, and self-employed, which are regulated under slightly different regulations, but there is also quite a numerous group of those who are employed under civil law contracts, and they are not covered by labor law. Labor code. That means that their protection is very limited. Yes, and in this context, the initiative that is undertaken by ETUC, namely extending the definition of the worker, would be very much adequate to the Polish context, because regulation that would come from the EU level could impact national legislation and would be very relevant for protecting platform workers in Poland. So let me put a stop in this point and pass the floor to Małgorzata, who will introduce you to the only legal regulation that has been discussed recently, and that regards taxi drivers or passenger transport.
Okay. My name is Małgorzata Koziarek, and I'm from the Institute of Public Affairs in Poland. Okay, so let's describe the measures that we have in Poland. I'm going to talk in the transport sector. I will focus on taxi services mainly, because this is where the first platform entered the Polish market. I mean Uber, and as a result of some media hype and the interest, what happens with the money earned by drivers who work for Uber, in terms of whether their work is declared anywhere and whether any taxes are paid on the money they earned. The Ministry of Finance responded with the statement that in the case of Uber drivers, you cannot identify an employer. And in such a case, the person who earns money needs to register self-employment, meaning one-person business activity. Yes? Which means that in order to be able to pay taxes. So that means that such a person would himself or herself take care of contributing to the tax system and also contributing to the social security system, because self-employment, one-person business activity, is also covered with social protection, and that and will also need to take care of all the bookkeeping work, that is formalities related to running a one-person company. So as a result, Uber several months after the statement was announced, officially declared that it's not going to cooperate with anybody who is not a registered business, which means that drivers that want to use the Uber application needs to be entrepreneurs themselves. Yes, need to be registered. The result was that some of the drivers left, especially those who for whom that was an extra job. Some registered their business activity, that is taxi driving activity, and some got another opportunity, because they could work through other entities who would have this business status, registered status, so could be a partner for Uber, and they could employ those drivers who don't want to register as entrepreneurs. Yes? And The estimate of Uber was, I think it was last year's estimate, or that 40% of drivers work for so-called partners, and the partner company is a fleet company. That is a company which has a number of cars and owns the cars and or leases the cars and takes care of the maintenance of the cars and petrol and everything, and employs drivers who provide services for Uber. However, so from the legal point of view, we had those drivers who registered as entrepreneurs and drivers working via partners who were employed by those partner firms under civil law contracts, which means they could enjoy a certain level of social security, because this is what the Polish law requires, but no labor rights. And what is important to add is the financial aspect of the whole thing, because as a result, the net income has dropped. Those who registered as entrepreneurs had to start to pay taxes and social security contributions. Those who work through partners need to I mean, partners take 40% of the money which is left after Uber deducts its margin. So 60% is left is left to the driver. And the Uber margin has not changed. Actually, it's 25%. Yes. So the fact that the social protection costs had to be incorporated and personal income taxes had to be incorporated resulted in quite radical fall in the actual income made by the drivers, which contributed to the following: the inflow of migrants who could accept lower fees, like Ukrainians who come to Poland to earn money and then to spend their earnings in Ukraine, where the spending, I mean, the money has a better spending power, so to say, and also a lot of drivers working via partners do not have any contracts. Yes, because if they want to get more money, then they would prefer not to pay social security or tax, and it's also, let's say, better or more convenient for the so-called partners. So that's so to put the long story short. This the statement of the Ministry of Finance contributed to a certain level of registration of undeclared work, but didn't improve the situation of the drivers too much. I'm over time, yes? Okay. So, and I would like to just to mention that the similar model is found in cleaning services. Yes. Then the other important issue was the question of fair competition and the licensing. So the Ministry of Infrastructure, which was another ministry interested in the operation of platforms in the taxi services, decided to make an easier access for new entrants to the sector, because they held many audits of drivers, and it turned out that they are delivering the service without the required documents, and the taxi services are licensed part of the market. Which of course is not welcome by the licensed taxi drivers who have been present in the market for a long time, and under the regulations proposed by the Ministry of Infrastructure, also there is a new player introduced, the intermediary in a transport service. This is and so such platforms who do not deliver transport services, but they are intermediaries by matching the passengers and the drivers, they will have to get a license for such an activity, and also will be obliged to check whether the drivers who deliver the service have the relevant licenses for transport. Now, and also what is important, they will need to register all the orders and keep this data for 5 years. And now, what's important in this story, that on the government side, only the Ministry of Finance was interested to address the issue of Uber and similar platform. The Ministry of Infrastructure, because it's interested in the standards present in the sector, in the transport sector, and the Ministry of Entrepreneurship as an actor promoting entrepreneurship and also new business models, new technologies. No Ministry of Labor at all, and what seems to be a missed opportunity, for instance, is this. The function of this, the control function, which will be eased, which will be made possible through this obligation of registering the orders, for monitoring the compliance with labor-related regulations. Yes. So that's
Thank you very much, Margosata. I propose we proceed directly to the last case, Bill of Lazio, then we have a global discussion. So we are 15 minutes late. Is this okay for the interpret? Is this okay, 15 minutes? 15 minutes? If we finish at a quarter after 1, yeah? Okay. Okay? Okay?
Okay.
5 minutes. 5 minutes. So we finish at 5 minutes after 1.
Okay, I will try to be very quick, not to have anyone starving in at least I'm afraid we are already. First of all, just to let you know, this law, I'm going to talk about a local initiative. It's a bill that was finally approved in March and became a law in April. I will skip all the political issue because this is actually within a clash between the Five Star Movement and the Democratic Party about passing protections for protecting riders, but I will skip this issue. Maybe we'll talk among the partnership later. So what does the bill say? Basically, I would say that the bill is built on two legs. There is one leg that's about giving some rights to these workers, and another that's about supportive measures. As to the first one, we have a set of rights. First of all, similarly to the Charter of Bologna, workers are granted minimum pay at least in line with collective agreement. Plus, and that's an interesting addition, they shall be granted a specific indemnity whenever their shift is cancelled, not due for their reason, let's say a snowfall, or because the employer say they are no longer needed. So it's a bit like reversing, no, the idea. Apart from that, they shall be granted social protection in line with national standards. So even if the law does not specify if they shall be employed or self-employed, basically it's like moving pretty much toward the employee status, because if you don't change they have not the power to change, of course, the type of employment relationships. So as of now, in order to have these levels, you should either apply a subordinate contract or a self-employment contract, but which would be risk to be qualified as self-employed. Yeah. As usual. Sorry, I'm too quick. Okay. Yeah, indeed, there are also to make some agreements with the social security institutions to possibly enable this. There is a set of information rights pretty similar to the directive that is going to be approved on the transparent and predictable working conditions. And they include also the right to be informed about the rating system, the ranking system, how this works, and includes as well the portability of the rating. So in theory, workers should be granted this option, and the possibility for workers to access a procedure for an impartial procedure for rebuting the rating whenever they think that's not fair. So this is mostly about the new rights for workers. Let's switch to the second leg. Before, it is to be said that social protection, labor law are not at all a competence except for some very minor exceptions. So they are not a competence of regions. So there are serious tweets that this law will be challenged. And as for the Italian Constitution, it might be challenged not only in courts, but also by the government itself within the next month, actually, within the next 60 months, but from the approval, so it's in a month. So probably it's also because of that we have a set of promotional measures, among which we have a fair label for platforms that adhere to the law, and among these they have also to implement a set of training measures, preventive measures concerning health and safety that will be defined afterwards by the Lazio region. A web portal mostly with information and meant also to support the adhesion to welfare schemes implemented by social partners. And finally, a stakeholder committee. Again, this stakeholder committee will be composed by social partners, by experts, and by platforms upon condition they adhere to the law, they accept the law. And this is supposed to have a role also in amending possibly the law, suggesting some further policy proposals, and finally to draft a charter. It's not very well specified. Okay, there is an article about this charter. It's probably something that will look like the Bologna Charter, but probably, again, the idea is to have a non-binding instrument that will still survive in case, at least that's my idea, I don't know, in case the law is challenged successfully as unconstitutional.
Merci beaucoup, Feliciano. Alors, j'ouvre.
Thanks for that, Feliciano. Let me open the floor. We have 7 or 8 minutes. I'm sorry, things go really fast. Let me give you the floor. J'aimerais...
Because 3 days ago, he got his PhD with me in labor law at Università Cattolica di Milano. So, you know, he mixed up everything. So.
Io penso che sui temi...
I think that on this subject of the people who work on platforms, our governments haven't been doing enough. Including, of course, our governments in general, and especially the Italian government. If there are no standards set defining them either as dependent or self-employed workers, one or the other, I mean, each country is just looking into that and trying to decide where we're going. But at any rate, if that status isn't determined on one side or the other, in some way, the work performed by these people, well, at any rate, won't lead to any sort of social security contributions or taxes. And in fact, this even calls into question the very social status of each country, because when these people grow old, if they haven't been paying for their retirement, or if no one's been paying for their retirement, for them it's a problem in Italy, because they'd have a social pension that the whole community would have to pay for. The taxes that they're not paying would serve to pay for schools, health, and things like that. So this is a subject which is becoming really serious, even in quantitative terms. So I think that in Europe, and the ETUC is working on this, European Trade Union Council is speaking about decent work and rights. But I think this is an important subject. If we don't deal with this, we're going to have a problem of a social equilibrium. And perhaps our governments haven't understood this yet.
Maybe very briefly, my name is Sławomir Adamczyk. I represent Trade Union Solidarność. I would like to say that it's a great honor, great pleasure for us to take part in this project, to listen about your experiences, because as Dominic said, we in Poland do not have such experiences, but we know that this is a great challenge for the future of trade unions, not only in Poland, but in other countries. Only one remark concerning this situation, which is in Poland. This is a very common denominator for all Central Eastern European post-communist countries. It's because of this that the structure of trade unions in our countries is to very much extent rooted at company level. So all trade unions' rights, trade unions' privileges are linked to company level. If we have national union, it is built upon these company unions. So you can imagine how difficult it is to embed these platform workers in such structure. If you do not have, you have to identify employer. So platforms do not want to feel as employers. So it's really, if you do not have the sectoral level strength, sectoral level of collective bargaining, sectoral level of trade unions, it's very difficult to effectively represent these platform workers. But we'll try to do our best, using also your experiences, especially these Italian experiences are very interesting for us. These non-binding documents which can be negotiated or signed together with municipalities. So once again, thank you. And
Merci. D'autres?
Thanks. Anyone else? Antoine, did you want to say something regarding the protection from requalification of companies? Something that I forgot to say? Yeah, there's a debate, given the French situation, around the question of these charters in the law. And a company that would sign a charter might then be protected from being requalified. That's an idea, but it hasn't been accepted as a legal principle. Far from it. That's what the whole debate's about. To what extent? I mean, if we wrote that in a law, would that bring about a legal protection to the platform? Because there's a debate amongst French jurists to decide whether or not that protection should be offered, protection for requalification should be offered in exchange for the acceptance of a charter. That's a point that's far from being clear. I mean, a collective bargaining agreement it might be very clear, but a unilateral act like a charter can't really be taken by a judge as being binding. It might be a reference, and it can serve as a point of comparison for other cases, for their legal treatment, but it has no legally binding force on the judge. This is a subject that's under debate then in France. Yes. So, any other reactions? Very well. Let me give the floor to the Brodolini Foundation to wrap up the morning session. For partners and also external observers, we'd like to thank for coming. We as project partners are going to continue this afternoon after our lunch break, but you're all invited to lunch, which is in room 3120, just below, unlike the coffee break.
For this morning, these sessions, they were very fruitful, I'm sure, for all of us. There was a sort of comparative approach. I belong to the scholars that is convinced that the comparative approach is always imperfect, always. But today, in my view, we had the chance to put together a lot of items, and in some way we are almost on the way to be perfect. So, for the future, a few words before we deserve our rights to our food. I believe that moving from the classification, the conceptualization of this morning, the 4 areas, so Uber model, TaskRabbit model, Deliveroo model, and Mechanical Turk, Amazon Mechanical Turk models, I would like to point out 3 issues that could be in the next future issues that can help us to improve our jobs, to improve our research, and to meet again in September during the fall with some outcomes that we can again share. The first issue regards the distinction between employees and self-employed, and in addition to this distinction, I would like to put on the table something that Fondazione Brodolini and I in the past stressed as a point that we need to have in mind for the future. This morning Ignazio recalled it, and I would like to put that on the table. We do not have only the distinction between employees and self-employed. Maybe, as we stressed since 2014, we are in front of something that is much more closer to agency worker. So we should again take into consideration that maybe for the future try to understand if, pursuant to our legal domestic legal system, we have chance to work on that. We have something like a tripartite relation. We need to understand if there is room in our system, and above all, if we will have in the next future contact with the European Commission, the forming European Commission, and ETUC, we should understand if we can intervene on the directives regulating agency workers, because this regulation cannot be a domestic decision, should be a European decision. This is the first issue. The second issue that I believe we should deeply investigate in the next future is the relation between the statutory minimum wage, or whatever that is similar to statutory minimum wage, and the CBA, because we should understand that the competition, the dumping that there is at national level between statutory and collective bargaining. Ivana stressed very well this point when she said collective bargaining are there to grant more than statutory minimum wage. So we should understand if there is this competition in relation to the gig workers and each area of the gig workers classification. Of course, we should also understand if our Swedish colleagues stressed we have already in our national experience collective bargaining extending their own personal scope on gig workers. So we understood today restaurant, hotel sector, maybe logistics sector, maybe in other countries there is something like that. We should stress that I understood how the protection, working hours, salary, pension and so on are managed by collective bargaining, private pension I was saying, and were managed by collective bargaining for this purpose. The third issue that I suggest to investigate for the future is the union strategy vis-à-vis with the employers' organization. I have in front of me Thomas, that is one of the most influential academic in the world, scholar studying this matter. I know that he can share this viewpoint. We need in the next future to understand also interviewing CFO of CFO, not HR, CFO of delivery business. We need to understand the business strategy in relation to that, because we understood in our research that a portion of their current business strategy is to be not enrolled or to avoid any kind of connection with the employers' organization in order to avoid any kind of link with the negotiation table or whatever. Of course, there is a different approach for different countries, but my premises cover all of that because comparative approach is always imperfect, so we know. But we need to understand that. Now, these three issues, in my view, should be, in any case, getting contacts with the two macro fields that this morning, during the ping-pong ideas that we had, the brainstorming that we had, were arised. And they are, on one side, the tax fulfillment, and on the other side, the social security fulfillment. Tax means, of course, again, business strategy. I don't want to pay workers in line with in order to reduce my tax burdens, but means also, if I correctly understood, the individual tax approach, because we have in workers that decide to be not visible, to be irregular in order to avoid tax application. Maybe, if I correctly understood. In some cases, it could be that. Under social security viewpoint, and I'm going to close, we have to understood if this ongoing, not regular approach to employees, to workers in gig economy can have an impact on sustainability of social security system in the future. This is a very huge problem. However, if we have these three items plus these two fields, maybe we can have for the next future a very high-level meeting as we had today, this morning. Thank you very much and for your attention, and go on.
Thank you to everybody, and now it's over. Sorry. It's not my fault. It's I respected the 5 minutes, so okay. Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup aux interprètes.
Thank you very much to the interpreters.
Voilà. Antoine, est-ce qu'on peut laisser